Welcome to another episode of Visual Tech. I'm excited to have here Judah Taub, managing partner of Hetz Ventures. We're over at their offices in Sarona, and it's like in Sarona on the ground. So it's probably the best location. I actually made a video of it while I was waiting for you guys. I put it on Twitter just how great this location is. But anyway, Judah, thanks for being on.
Thank you.
So first, let's just talk about Hetz, just as a VC, and we'll hear a little bit about your background. But what exactly are you guys doing here, and why is it any different from any other VC?
Yeah, so definitely just one quick thing about the location, which is worth mentioning. So we're sitting in a Templar. As you probably know, the Templars were built by the Germans about 150 years ago, and the government sat here in 1948. And if you go around the buildings here, a lot of them have a plaque. And it says on the plaque what they were used by the government. So some of them was where the defense minister sat, etc. The office we're sitting here in today is where the head of innovation sat in 1948.
Oh, wow.
So when we were looking at the different Templars, that's what won me over. Yeah, so we should be doing cherry tomatoes agri-tech. Not quite what we focus on today, but it's pretty historic to be sitting here.
I won't ask how much you pay for rent. It's prime real estate, maybe off camera.
No, you can ask that. It's actually a funny story. So during at the very beginning of COVID, we just sort of closed our second fund and we were looking to move into a permanent office. And the startup that was here was a close friend, and the guy called me up and said, "We're moving out. This is a great location. Call them up today and you'll get a good deal because we're going to literally tell them today that we're leaving. They're going to want to find somebody." Anyway, we got actually a really good deal on the offices. And I spoke to an LP probably 6-8 months into COVID, and the LP was a bit nervous. He said to me, "Where's the world going? How are you doing?" And I said to him, "Don't worry, we just did a phenomenal deal." And he said to me, "Oh, go on, tell me about it." And I thought it was funny. I said to him, "We just got a really good deal on our offices." He didn't find that funny, but anyway, that's the story of the offices. Hetz.
Yeah.
So Hetz, so we are a little bit different. At the end, a VC is a VC, but we're a little bit different in a number of ways. The first is, I think, the DNA of the people here. You've come in, you've walked around. Yeah. Hopefully, you sort of got a feel for it. But I think it's fair to say that everybody who works at Hetz today, if Hetz wasn't around, they would be at a startup, not at a private equity firm, not at a hedge fund, definitely not at another VC. The DNA here is very much a startup DNA. We're all sitting in the same room. You can't tell who sits where, etc. We brainstorm together. We're extremely transparent. And this is not something that's so typical for a VC, which is usually decisions made behind closed doors, etc. We're very technical. Most of us and everybody in the investment team used to once be an engineer, write code, manage teams, etc. And as a result, I think a lot of other folks who want to start their own companies feel comfortable sitting here. And you can see examples of soon-to-be founders that are sitting in these offices. They're coming in and out, etc. So one big difference about Hetz is going to be the DNA. And the big passion for me for starting Hetz was to try and create a vibe like this, people like this who just want to sit here, come in, brainstorm. And yeah, it's very much, number one would be the DNA.
Yeah, I saw, like when I got here, I was speaking to Guy, your DNA guy. Not DNA, your data guy.
Yeah.
And so when I was here, I was sitting here and one of our clients walked in, and you just get this vibe of like people are coming in and out. It's just a full entrepreneurial, greater mission. Everyone, the individual is important and contributes to a much greater mission, and you feel it. And we've been to many offices of many VCs, and that shared space is most definitely unique. So I do love that about it. That's really cool that you're able to do that. So you said when you founded it, you had all of this in mind. You thought VCs would be better. Were you looking at VCs and like, hey, their model is, let's say, broken or outdated, or maybe, what is it? Like, did you see that something was wrong and then you went and tried to fix it? How do you come by kind of doing things differently from a VC, at least when it comes to the people you hire and the space that you share?
Excellent question. So one quick thing just for everybody who's out there, you asked the question, what does Hetz do? So Hetz leads early stage investments. We're nearly always the first money in. We've made roughly 35 investments to date. And I think in 32 of them, we were the first money in and led the deal.
So how much is when you do the first seed or pre-seed, how much are you doing usually?
The smallest ticket we've written to date is I think it's $250,000, and the largest was probably $5.5 million. So it's...
Where's the median about?
Probably close to the average. So it's going to be, it's going to be, I think in Fund 3 currently, our average ticket size is 2.7.
Right.
So yeah, we're typically leading. It's nearly always going to be in a sector that we feel very confident in. So it will be either cybersecurity, data, AI, machine learning, engineering. Those are the areas that we have also a pretty impressive network, which we can talk about and how that helps us. But yeah, I mean, that's what we do. We're doing that in a repetitive way. And today, I think it's over 50% of the founders that we invest in are referred by other Hetz entrepreneurs. So the network that you're talking about here,
awesome.
It's getting easier to do what we're doing.
Amazing. So they find you almost.
Yes. If I think about the last 5 deals that we've done, I would say probably in 4 of them that's been the case.
That's awesome. That's the way to do it. I mean, even business I get, it's all
Yeah.
word of mouth, and then people come back.
Yeah.
They said, "Dude, I shared great things for my friend," and it's just natural growth, and you get to work with people who already kind of know who you are, and so there's that warmer connection. So let's say talk about the actual work that you do. Okay, so we understand obviously the culture is different, how you kind of build this thing is different, the space is different, who you hire is different. When it comes to analyzing what you think might be, let's say, a good opportunity or a good deal or things, does everyone more or less look at the same metrics or the same things? How would it, why would certain, other than obviously you have specialties in different industries or maybe unique insights, do you have any unique insights and kind of maybe certain data or things that you're looking for you think that you may do differently than other VCs?
As I mentioned earlier, the DNA of the team is hugely important. It was hugely important for me when starting Hetz. For me, it's the number one thing, and everybody at Hetz will tell you that. Like for me, making sure that Hetz is run properly, that people are able to bring the most from themselves and for it to bear fruits. And I can give a variety of examples where an idea that Liz or Anat or Pavel or anybody else just had, and we just said, go run with it, go explore, shoot from the hip, and I'm all in favor of that. So I think the DNA here is very important, and it's probably even more important or just as important when you're trying to look at founders starting a startup. For us, it's hugely helpful to interact with these people as early as possible. So the fact that we've got one team sitting there and one team sitting there, which by the way, statistically, we wouldn't back any of them. Like statistically speaking, most teams that sit in our offices, we don't end up backing, sometimes for good reasons and we stay friends, or sometimes they don't just end up starting their venture. So everything can happen. But that just gives you an enormous amount of insight that taking 3 calls and a dinner or a bunch of Zooms and some reference calls just doesn't give you. You want to see how they interact. You want to see how they diligence their own idea. Just as an example, too many founders seem to believe that if a VC or a good VC comes along and says, here's $5 million, then they've done it, or it's a good idea. They're taking a much bigger bet on their startup than we are. We have a portfolio and we will do well, I think, regardless of their startup.
Because the large numbers, the average just...
Well, like take our current fund.
You need one home run of like a fund of 20 companies.
You need just one home run, but we're going to end up in Fund 3 making 20 investments, and I can already see some of them succeeding. Fund 3 is going to be fine.
Right.
So the next investment we make, which will be number 12 in Fund 3, like, is that investment a do or die for us? Like, yes, we will go and do diligence like nobody else, and we will try and make sure that this is the biggest success ever. But if you compare the importance of that company to Hetz versus to the founder, obviously the founder's taking a much bigger bet here. But for some reason, some founders just feel like, you know what, if somebody's willing to give me money for this, then I should just run for it.
Right.
And you can see that when they're diligencing their idea.
Right.
You can see some founders are like, you know what, I'm not worried about the money, I'm not worried about this, I'm worried about something completely different, whether it's the execution, whether I need to relocate, whether the founders that I've hired are in the right roles. And it doesn't matter what they're worried about, but suddenly you're in a conversation which is completely different, a bit like what you're trying to create here. You don't want to do the standard media, let me tell you what the answers should be, let me tell you what the question should be. Rarely do I learn very much just from them presenting their presentation. It's just not telling me much. When you talk to them about why they started their startup, how they got to their founders, what issues have they already come across? I mean, there's nearly always tension before they've even met VCs and seeing how they resolve that.
What do you mean tension?
Between the founders.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's the most interesting part.
Right.
I mean, if there isn't tension there, they're not doing something big, they're not pushing themselves.
Right.
Like, that's good tension. Yeah, it's good. But like, so I think a key part of what we try and do is we try and be part of that. We try and help them. We'll make a whole variety of introductions to potential customers, and we'll see how they deal with them. And they love it because for these early stage startups to get in front of S&P 500 companies is like a pain in the ass. How do they get there? How do they get their attention? Are they giving them real answers? And we will give them afterwards the information that they gave us off the call, and compare that to the way sort of they analyze the call. And that's, by the way, just like a really interesting insight. So some founders are really good at reading the room or reading the customer, and some just completely miss the mark. And so when you're trying to analyze a team and think like how well they'll do in the future, that is, for example, an amazing insight. If the founder says, look, this customer doesn't want my product, but if I offered him X, he would pay $1 million for it, and you hear the customer say that, that's a huge tick from my perspective. The guy knows exactly what the customer wants, he understands what he has to deliver, and now let's decide if he should develop X or not. A lot of founders come back and say, it was an amazing call, they loved it. They will definitely pay in the future. And then you go and speak to the guy, and I'll relay this to the founders. It's not like we're hiding anything. And I'll say, listen, actually there was a big bit of a misunderstanding here, and you're trying to project what happens in the future with a startup like that. And I don't know, maybe they'll succeed anyway, but you can already foresee the multiple product pivots, the fact that they project people closing and they don't actually close. So what I'm trying to say is we really try and work and help the founders. And as part of it, we'll just learn whether we believe in the team and whether we're partners that just should work together as well.
We're talking off camera, and
Yep.
you were talking about a lot of people using wrong metrics. So
Yep.
you do look at things a little bit differently, at least when it comes to analyzing startups. What is your I want to say hashkafa, I don't know how to say it in English, viewpoint, outlook on evaluating startups that you think you do differently than others?
Yes, so I'll mention two things here. The first is, so we took a whole bunch of our startups, and obviously we get in at seed, so they have nothing. But we took a whole bunch of our startups, roughly 20, and I think we took the last 20, this must have been about 6 months ago, that raised their Series A and B, and we plotted their data just on a graph, and we brought the founders here and just showed them it and said, look, this is the ARR you had when you raised, this is the valuation you got. This is the number of employees you had, and these are the folks who succeeded. This is the amount of runway you have, and this is when you were able to raise. And we just showed them the stats, because sometimes sort of talking to them so much and just doesn't help. And what was amazing to see in the stats that some of the standard notions that you have to hit $1 million ARR to raise your Series A, for example, is completely just untrue. You can see multiple startups getting heavily preempted and others way past the $1 million mark struggling to raise. And then sort of you ask yourself, why is this? And I think it's pretty clear. And that is that what VCs ultimately want to do is they want to back startups that will end up being huge successes. Having ARR or paying customers is hopefully a signal to whether that will work or not. But for example, if I have 20 customers, each paying me for completely different products, and I'm doing this one as a service, and this one I've taken something open source, wrapped it up and just shipped it off, and this one is a friend of a nephew of a cousin, so he's paying me anyway, or I got the introduction in a way that is not repeatable, the fact that I have $2 million, $5 million of ARR is actually not a great indication to the fact that this will be a very big customer down.
Right, it's not necessarily scalable, there's no expertise.
Doesn't mean anything.
Right.
On the other hand, if I now have a startup who maybe has done 100K, so a tenth of what people talk about, you need to raise your Series A, 100K in ARR. But I've now built a product that I say to you, put this in front of any customer who uses AWS. You give me a customer and he will tell you, I want this now, and I'm willing to pay for it big bucks. And you go and do your diligence and you send me to 5 customers and 5 out of 5 say, I want this now, and I will pay big bucks. That's the company you're going to invest in, way before you invest in the first. And it's obvious. This company is one that actually has potential. There's a lot of customers using AWS, big bucks per each one, times that by the number of them, and everyone will be wanting to preempt that startup. So the notion of ARR being the main metric is for example, I just think is horribly wrong. And the second one, which I'll just mention shortly, is how much runway or how efficient you've been with your capital. And so the startups who go and raise when they have 30 days left and they're burning tons of cash, again, you come back to this story and you're like, is this a big company? You're sort of scratching your head and you're trying to figure it out. The guys who've been really good with their dollars and are telling a coherent story are typically going to find it much easier to raise.
So ARR doesn't tell the picture, and you should be avoided. If someone wanted to look at one metric, not having to speak with the founders and feel all that, what is a great way? What do you think is the best metric?
I'll tell it differently. Tell your story backwards. That is the biggest piece of advice I can give. Tell your story backwards.
Where you're starting from, not how you started, but where you are now, and go back.
No. What company have we just invented together? Give it a name. You're the PR guy.
I'm a PR guy. Thank you. What a compliment or an insult.
Oh, sorry.
Taub Technologies.
Taub Technologies. And what do we do?
We build satellites.
Satellites. And how is this going to be a company that is selling $1 billion plus?
We're going to have to find a way to probably do it at scale.
Who's paying us $1 billion?
Probably space technology companies that have contracts with
Amazing.
Governments.
So in 2030, we're going to be selling $1 billion or more to the following 10 customers. Mm-hmm. In order to sell to the following 10 customers, what are we going to have to do?
We're going to have to network our way in. We're going to have to build prototypes.
Fantastic.
We're going to have to already demonstrate that we can launch satellites.
So by 2028, we have to be in POCs, already working pilots, etc., with all of them. In order to do that in 2026, we're going to already have to have a working product, and we're going to have the first 2 signed contracts. And I don't know, that means that today, where we are is putting the team together, etc. I've just now told the story with you backwards. Then the VC or anybody else will turn around and say, okay, do I think this is a big story? You tell me. Maybe they'll say to me, I don't believe $1 billion is big enough in 2030. Maybe they'll say, I don't believe that you'll be able to get the POCs done in 2026 or 2028, or whatever it is. I want you to tell the story backwards because it shows me you're aiming big, and then we can go back on the major steps we have to get to or achieve to get there, and we can talk about them together. By doing that, I think we're aligning on the road, you're the investor or the partner or whoever I'm trying to bring on board, on where we need to go together and where this leads us. What I don't want to hear is, in 2020, I did my master's in aerospace engineering. In 2021, I met Shuki. In 2022, Shuki and I had an idea and we met Moshe in the coffee shop. In 2024, that's great, but that doesn't tell me you're going to be a big company. That doesn't tell me how this is going. Paint me the big picture.
Right. Do you think is there a lack of vision for founders? Do you think?
I don't think there's a lack of. I don't think there's a lack of vision. There's definitely not a lack of ambition, but I think.
No, I didn't say ambition. I said vision.
So I don't think there's a lack of vision, and sometimes that comes from the fact that they're very ambitious. So they're trying to think of a big vision, but the way some folks tell a story, it's very much like, we acquired the first customer on January, the second customer on February. That's great, but let's tie that into the big mission that we're setting out to. And you can see some companies will raise $200, $300, $400, $500 million without selling a dollar. I am sure that obviously Elon Musk is Elon Musk and he's got a big name, etc., and he's sort of impressive. But I'm sure he didn't turn around when he was raising capital for Tesla and say, so yesterday I met the team member, and tomorrow I'm going to hire this guy. And by the way, 3 weeks ago, we filed our first patent. No, he said, by this day and age, or by this point of time, we want to be selling X number of cars. And that market is absolutely enormous. And we could make a huge profit on it because 1, 2, 3, 4, which means that 2-3 years earlier, we need to do this and this and this, which is why yesterday I met this guy, which is why 3 weeks ago, we already signed this patent. I mean, I'm tying it in, but to a big vision. So my one piece of advice, if I have to only give one, to any founder going to raise, nearly regardless of the round, seed, A, B, whatever, I would start from the big picture and then tell you the story backwards.
Let's talk about kind of how you got here, all right, to where you are, and how you built this vision and these ideas, and that you're able to help so many founders and startups in the Israeli tech ecosystem. You said you were born in London, but as a baby you moved over to Israel. How did you get here? How did you get involved? How did you build a team? How did you network? Maybe you can kind of walk us through it, kind of your unique experience of working and networking within the Israeli tech ecosystem.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of questions, so just one or two. my exposure started off when I was at Lansdowne, a hedge fund, and they made an investment into Oxford, a big investment, which they led, and they basically created an entity where 30% roughly of all IP coming out of Oxford belonged to this entity. And a lot of the most impressive investors you can imagine sort of invested in it. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. And I was privileged to be part of a group of people who were going backwards and forwards to Oxford to meet the future founders, the scientists, etc. And for me, it was an eye-opening experience of how ideas can really potentially change the world, and how my skill set, which was back then sort of running data, was probably much more relevant to the early stages and the folks that I was sitting with there than the late stages of being a hedge fund, and you're sort of slightly more sort of running Excels and doing back of the envelope calculations of whether the price of a stock is high or low. And that got me really excited. I started sitting with a bunch of VCs. I sat in 2 offices of VCs in Israel. They tried to persuade me to join. I was learning the industry. And my big takeaway from all of that was there is room for a next generation venture firm, which is run by younger folks with a more transparent attitude, where the people at the top are the technical ones, with a slightly different dynamic with founders. And that was sort of where the passion came from, and I think you can probably feel is still today.
Dude, you speak to me, because Israel Tech, that's exactly what we're trying to do, what we're building, and we're only a few months in, but is like, the people that are running the show are people that understand media, are people active in media. We're thinking about the future of new media. We're talking about video, where no pay to play, no favorites, no friends, no quotes. We're not bringing people to our website as much as we're bringing people to social media. Let's democratize it, decentralize it, let's flatten it, let's share that information. And that's the best way that we can elevate the Israeli tech ecosystem. And I think I think every industry is starting to see a whole generational change. You see this in education, you see this in literally everything, where the old guards and all of that is just, people are like, you do things wrong, and it's not even about like, let me change it, let me do my own thing my own way, and let me prove you I'm right. And then in 10 years, other people will follow and build things similar to me, and we can change the industry that way. I'm getting very similar vibes from what you're doing.
You've made our pitch.
Yeah.
You've made our pitch better than we do. So
I love it. Because I can relate to it. It sounded like you were talking. It sounded like you were pitching Israel Tech in a way. Just with VC.
So here's the weird thing. thing. As a VC, what you do is you're meeting entrepreneurs who basically pitch that to you. You're meeting, I don't want to say young, because they don't have to necessarily be below a certain age, but people who still see themselves before the peak of their career,
right,
which could be also at the age of 50. So I'm not discriminating against a particular age, but it's people who say, I'm still the future's ahead of me. And what they want to do is they want to change something big in an ecosystem that they think has just been outdated, etc.
Right.
So for us, the DNA fit is typically very, very strong, because we're like you're trying to do in media, like we're trying to do in venture capital, they're trying to do in their own vertical or whatever they're operating in. So for me, sitting in a bunch of VCs and just walking around, it was funny to hear some, not all, and there's a lot of other very good venture capitalists with a lot of positivity, etc. But it was funny to hear some venture firms with the attitude of, no, we're going to invest in people disrupting ecosystems. But no, our ecosystem is the one that has to stay the way it is, run by the same people, etc.
Right. We support innovation everywhere except me, because I don't want to lose my control and power over other people. Amazing.
And you said that, by the way. I didn't say that last sentence,
right,
but yes.
Right, but by the way, I'm thinking of that in media, but
Okay,
I'm assuming it's similar in every industry, and I don't think VCs are any different. In tech, so I want to talk a little bit kind of about the war, and I'm seeing a little bit more in tech. And I'm seeing more, one of the most interesting things I saw is, regarding the war, is 40% of people killed were actually religious in the war, and actually how people are responding to that. That I think a lot of the religious community has been taking on, at least the religious Zionists, a disproportionate amount of the responsibility. I'm starting to see more of the same community move into the tech ecosystem. Do you see this similar in the opportunities? Do you just wondering how do you think, does this change how does that change, let's say, the dynamics or the relationships, since it's very much, the ecosystem is bringing people people you worked together before, people you've already worked with, is very hard for people, let's say, that doesn't fit into those connections to break into the mold. How do you think we can get more people that aren't the traditional the traditional people in Israeli technology to bring new players in?
Okay, so I'll say three quick comments on that jump to mind. So the first is, it is true that the modern Orthodox or religion has, you said, taken more of the responsibility. I would say it's been more of a privilege. I think the modern Orthodox has had more of a privilege, because that's the way I see it, of serving their country or our country over the last, call it roughly 174 days. I was in Miluim, so I was called up. I did 111 days. I'm one of 6 children in my family. I'm the oldest. All of my siblings were all called up, including my brother-in-law. All of them did over 100 days of service, and 2 of them are still, as we speak now, in Gaza serving. And I don't think it's taking more responsibility. I would say it's a privilege. So that would be number 1. On the tech ecosystem, you are seeing a trend similar to what you're seeing in the military. So if you go to some of the top military units, I was in one of them, especially in the combat, but slowly also in intelligence as well. 10, 15, 20 years ago, you used to see 1 or 2 kippot, yarmulkes, and today you're seeing many, many more. Typically it is...
What percent would you say is it now?
Depends heavily on a variety of factors. So if you pick Tzamchanim Duvdevan, and if you pick Giusei August to Nov, you'll get different splits. The best way to probably predict what the future of Israel looks like, or the leaders look like, is look at a certain rank, call it roughly a Ma'og definitely, but even a bit lower than that, and you'll see how many yarmulkes, and that will tell you a huge story. It used to be the kibbutznikim many years ago, and it slowly gravitated towards the modern Orthodox.
Why? How?
Why?
Culturally, what do you think happened?
Well, if you go to a high school today, especially a modern Orthodox one, you will see that every single one of them will want to go in and serve, will sign up for more years, will go to the elite units. I mean, when I was in high school, we were being taken around, first of all, to see which yeshivas or where we should maybe spend a year or 2 volunteering before even going into the military. So if you think about that, you're going to volunteer for a year, potentially more, 2 years, before you start your service, because you don't even see your service as volunteering. So these folks are growing also as in number, but also just with their aptitude or what they want to achieve. It's changing, and I think across the spectrum, people are aware of that. Again, I see it as a privilege rather than a burden. So definitely that's, I think, what the future, in a way, holds more of than in the past. The final thing I'll mention is, you sort of alluded to in the tech ecosystem, I think that the religious guys, girls who served in the military or elsewhere are heavily sort of prevalent, and they're all over the tech ecosystem. I don't even remember off by heart how many of our founders are religious, because I don't think that's a metric. We don't look at it. They're pretty closely intertwined. There are other pockets of Israeli society that need to eventually integrate, should integrate to their benefit and to the state's benefit. And those are the ones that I think are going to need more work.
Do you want to mention
them
instead of being taboo?
No. So the obvious ones are going to be, number 1, the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox. I've got siblings that fall into that category, and just pure numbers, the economics of the state of Israel, and otherwise that's going to have to change. And I'll mention other ones which are not as big in number, but I'll give another example, is the Ethiopian community, where I have a personal connection, where I volunteer and help out, and there's a few different organizations that try and do this. And these are just pockets of society, some of them bigger than others, which would both benefit dramatically from integrating into tech, and tech would benefit dramatically from having them integrated. So
what do you think is the biggest obstacle?
Depends with which community.
Let's start with Ethiopian because I feel like it's easier to,
Yes.
less complicated.
So the Ethiopian community is one that's difficult mainly because they don't get the same opportunity. And I'm careful with the way I'm saying this. It's not that nobody wants to give them the opportunity, but I'll give an example. If you grow up in a typical Ethiopian community, for example, in Mevaseret, or there's a few other ones around the country, you don't have that first leg in. What's probably happened to you is you probably grew up, maybe graduated high school, decent scores, etc. Where'd you go in the military? Probably not one of the elite sort of 8200 areas that help you then get into tech. Why? Because you don't know how to apply there. You didn't sort of have the friend who tells you how to go past those exams so easily. And you probably didn't get sort of pushed in high school to do sort of extra math and computers. You then finish your high school. Then what are you doing? You're going back to your mates. You're going back to Mevaseret in this case. Who's going to give you a first job? Probably somebody within the community. A lot of them work as, I'm not saying this as taboo, these are the stats. They work in avodot muadafot. So these are jobs where the government give a few extra bucks for people who are in the military and to try and give them sort of a step up, like being working in a gas station. But that is not going to help you get into tech.
It's not a career. It doesn't build a career.
Doesn't build a career. Your salary is not going to scale any faster than inflation.
Right.
You're slowly gaining years, 25, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc. You're becoming less and less attractive because nobody wants to take a 42-year-old for a first job in tech. It's very difficult. You find it harder to take up a new skill and study. So it's really a challenge. The reason I like tech is because tech for an Ethiopian, or for this guy that we're describing, is unique. Tech, unlike becoming a lawyer, for example, doesn't have to require 4 years of studying in a bar exam. Go to any startup around here or any big firm, what they will tell you is, we don't really care about badges and certificates. We care about whether you can actually do the job. So if you can somehow learn Python or C++ in a month, I'll take you. If you can somehow be a front-end sort of designer or something like that and you're good enough, in a month, we'll take you. So you don't have to necessarily go back 100 steps to go forwards 101. What tech offers the Ethiopians is, if you can somehow be good enough, we will give you that first job. And somehow be good enough is not impossible, because what some folks are able to do, and there's organizations that help them, is within 10 months bridge that gap. And within 10 months get a first job in a place like Google, Facebook, Intel. Yeah, it's a first job, it's an Intel, which by the way is paying already better than the gas station. But that job is an entry ticket to a new world.
Right, exactly.
Your salary is going to scale, your opportunities will open up. Suddenly you'll start sort of maybe being able to afford a place, not in Mevaseret, which I'm not against Mevaseret, but it means that like your career opens up. Suddenly, and this is maybe a positive thing, there might be wealthy Ethiopians. Mm-hmm. I'm waiting for the first multi-millionaire Ethiopian, and that guy's going to come back and help his community, etc. So I think there's actually huge potential from both sides, both for tech to benefit from more labor people, which we're short of in Israel, and for Ethiopians to, in this case, find a way into technology which other more standard, more old school careers don't offer.
I live in Pardes Chana, and I was hanging out at the hookah joint there one Thursday night, and I was speaking with some of the Ethiopians there. They were younger, and they were saying, "Oh, yo, well, hire me, right? It's for marketing." And I'm like, "Listen, you have all the right characteristics. Everything's great, but no English." And I was like, "They're like, I'll work for free." I was like, "I have an opening. I'll train you." They said they'll take minimum wage or they'll work for free, but you don't have English. I find that is the greatest barrier, not just for the Ethiopian, but the Haredi community.
So, for
even more than math or science or anything.
So I went, for example, to Lod.
What good is a foot in the door? You can't get the foot in the door.
You're right.
Without any English, with no English.
You're right. So I will never forget that. So I went to Lod, where I gave a talk and was helping a group of Ethiopians there, part of Tech Korea. And they were in their sort of blitz, 10 months sleep on sort of campus, 6.5, 7 days a week working around the clock to try and get into tech by the end of their sort of blitz career, speed up, accelerator, whatever you want to call it. And I will never forget the look on this say woman, she sort of was probably about 24 after graduating the military, on her face when she was grinding her teeth trying to learn Python, where her biggest challenge was Python is written in English.
Right.
So things that would come intuitively to you and me, and she's
Right.
very clever, like she
Right.
did maths,
Yeah,
etc.
okay.
Read,
I was
write,
gonna say
whatever,
the-
and she's
the
like
math and the science
it-
with all the tools and the AI and all of that will be fine. And I remember, what was the cliche they said? You're not going to have a calculator in your
Yeah.
pocket everywhere you go. And they told me in high school when I was taking calculus, and it was like, oh, actually I do, and I don't even need the calculator anymore.
Yeah.
I can talk to my watch and it'll tell me what I need. So it's beyond that. I do think English will be a main barrier, but I also think technology can probably help with that too. I think Google has this thing where you can literally Google Translate. You can speak in your language and in almost real time spit it out in any other language.
So I'll mention something, nevertheless religiously related, which I see as a positive about Israel. And that is, we just finished now reading the book of Shemot. As you know, there's 5 books. We just finished the book of Shemot. And at the very end of the book of Shemot, we have the story of Moses doing 2 things. The first is he gets really annoyed because of the golden calf. And after that, he goes and is told how to build the Mishkan, and he builds the golden Kurvim, which is the most holy thing in the world. It's what sits at the center of Bet HaMikdash, then the Mishkan, etc. And there's a lot of parallels drawn between the two. The words Vayakel, Pikudei show Vayikalu Alad, they appear everywhere. And the question is asked, how is it that the most holy thing in the world, the Kurvim, made out of gold, etc., are somewhat similar to the golden calf, which is also made out of gold and described how it was came out of the fire, etc. What is it that one of them is made the holiest thing in the world and one of them is the least? And one of the answers given is that Moses was explicitly told to make one of them and the other one it wasn't. And there's a challenge. It sounds a little bit like a Haredi approach. If you're told to do something very, very, very specific, make the golden calf, you can do it. If you're not, the golden calf is terrible. Make the Kurvim, you can do it. If you're not, you're not. It's a very, very sort of narrow approach, binary. You have to be given, in army terms, clear gvulot gizra. You're allowed to do only between these 2 lines. Interestingly, the Haftarah, the end portion that we read on the same week of the story of the Mishkan, is of Shlomo building the Bet HaMikdash in Israel. And there, God tells him, thank you, build my home. And he's not given instructions in the same explicit way. He's not told, do exactly this and have this number of nuts and bolts. He basically says, yes, if you build a holy Bet HaMikdash, I, God, will come there. And the question then is asked, how is it that Moses was told exactly what to do? And Shlomo was given this creative freedom to build what became Bet HaMikdash, and God came there. And the answer given is that there is a difference when you're in Israel and when you're outside Israel. When you're outside Israel, when you're living in Poland in the 30s, when you're living in Russia or who knows where, the only way to stay Jewish, to stay true to your values, is to have a very, very narrow view. But when you're in the state of Israel, when you're surrounded by Jews, when you're living in Jerusalem, then you are allowed to express this creative freedom. And as long as it's done with a certain idea and values, God will come. And I think that's something that Israel has sort of done in a very impressive way. Mm-hmm. So Israel started off as we all know, nothing here. We're sitting in Sarona. There's a picture on the wall there. There's literally nothing here. You can see the picture of what it was. And it's thanks to this creativity of Jews and people coming back that has really allowed us to flourish.
That's beautiful. I think there's something unique about kind of that, the open community and the decentralization that you're able to have when you're living in Israel and the Jewish nation. There's more centralization of the community when you're living in a Jewish community in exile or in the diaspora, and here it's far more decentralized, so there's more opportunity to play and free expression and all of that, and to build sort of like with a sandbox, so to speak, within to build our community.
100%, just one cute idea there. If you look at the actual words, and I didn't want to make it too long, but when they built the Mishkan outside of Israel, the guy who was in charge of it, his name was Betzalel. If I translate that literally, it's Betzel, in the shadow of God. You have to do everything in such a specific way. And if you look at Shlomo, he's going to Lebanon. Why? Because they've got the better wood and trees. And he's bringing the trees from Lebanon, he decided. And then he's trading with other folks, etc. And he's put this whole enterprise together. He's then brought over the Queen of Sheba from Egypt to show her the marvels. She says, I've never seen such wisdom. It's literally the story that we're living today.
So let's take it back to the Jewish community abroad. We were just talking about the anti-Semitism universities. So I mean, you're from the UK and you went back and lived there. You said with your wife for a bit. How do you think? Is there a way we can turn this stuff around or no?
So I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that. It's bad. It's not good. I actually, when I finished my military service recently, my second wave, I was sent to the US and I went and did a speaker tour on a bunch of campuses, which was a strange experience. I was on certain campuses where they were asking me, how do you feel being part of a military that are killing babies every day? And I went to a different campus in a complete, as you can imagine, a different state, where one of the questions, not even from a Jewish student, completely sort of, southern state, he said, we just don't understand why you haven't bombed the place. And one of the takeaways for me is this country is more extreme on the two ends than Israel is. Israel can go into the US and not be on any of the extremes at all. It's hard. I was in the military not with my phone for about a week. When I came back and I saw tons and tons of missed calls, because I was both a student at HBS and Penn in the last, 6 years. And when this whole Congress story of putting the presidents of the universities on trial came, loads of journalists apparently reached out because they saw on LinkedIn I was here in the Israeli military, etc. But honestly, I don't know. It's a tough situation, and I think the main issue there is just education.
So I think what we discussed earlier about you need to rebuild your own university, kind of like you have your own vision of what a university should look like, your own vision of what a media company should look like or a VC should look like, build it, and then I think we'll start to see in a generation a whole bunches will be replicated based on a better model. And I think they're doing this at Austin University, and Barry Weiss is involved, and so they're starting to try to build like a new, real, actual university, liberal arts from the ground up. These places aren't redeemable, in my opinion. Do you think, right?
I think
once you're infested with anti-Semitism, that doesn't get, let's say, shaken off. Unfortunately, you'll have to be burned down to the ground and rebuilt.
So I was not so long ago living on campus in Harvard, so I was sleeping in dorms with a mixture of Muslims from the Middle East and folks from all around the world. And we had I don't know if you know this, but you basically live together, you learn from each other.
I stayed in the dorm at Temple University, yeah.
And it was great. Mm-hmm. It was great. And the folks there were super friendly. I still consider myself a really close friend with all of them. I think a lot of the anti-Semitism that people talk about comes from just a lack of knowledge and sometimes going with a random sort of flow of what's going on in campus.
Mob mentality.
Yeah, where there might be a small group of extremists, but the majority are just unaware. They don't fully sort of know, just like I don't know a lot about maybe where they come from and conflicts that they have. And when you sit down and have open, honest conversations, I found that, for example, some of the Muslims there, we had much more in common than some of the Americans.
I've learned that in general. I mean, we have much of the Abraham Accords kind of teaches you that.
Yeah.
We have far more in common with people here. I was reading Miss Iraq on Twitter, just ripping up people saying that the ISIS terror attack in Moscow were Jews. And he's like, I know ISIS. Like, I live this shit. And it's just like, I think these bored Westerners, and the Muslims there too, I mean, they just don't know it. They're just they're so locked in on everything's a conspiracy or this and that. And I don't know if it's redeemable. I think the future, the way the globe is looking, isn't looking very optimistic. Let's get to globalization for a minute, because I think the universities is a great example of where we think the private sector will go. a lot of the anti-Semitism in the private industry came from people hired from anti-Semites from universities. And therefore, we're starting to see more of this in politics, and it's making its way over to the rest of culture and the power players in the world. How would you say globalization has really actually liberated a lot of economies? It helped Israel liberate its economy. Where do you see globalization going forward? Do you think it's going to be redefined? Do you think it's going to be a step backwards? Are we going to pivot?
So I remember in 2000, I think it was early 2016, I was invited to come and hear a lecture by one of the top professors, who I won't name and you'll understand why, from NYU, who came over to Israel for a short few days, and he was basically going to tell a bunch of us what's going to happen in the world. And he said later this year we've got elections in the US, and before that we've got a British referendum. And he gave us this long speech with economics and diagrams explaining to us why there is no way that Britain will go ahead with Brexit and why Trump will definitely lose. And this was the top professor who came to teach us about where the world is going.
But I think that explains where the universities are when the top professor is just so out of touch with what's actually going on.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of wishful thinking and a lot of bubble thing, like you're in your bubble. By the way, this goes for every group. I'm not just talking about university professors.
Yeah.
But doesn't everyone like have their own bubble and they believe in what they think? And what does he read? He reads the New York Times and the Washington Post that say the same garbage that he already believes. And 99% of professors are just as brainwashed or more. And then they've brainwashed their students, who are then their muscle, who then feedback loop to them. And so there's no way around it, right? Why would he even think or know anything else?
So I think it was more of a humbling experience to everybody. Meaning, if the professor and the top professor could think that, then obviously all of us could get the future heavily sort of wrong.
Oh, that's so funny. I would think the opposite.
Okay.
I would think that the more professors are wrong, the more likely I'll be right.
Could be. But I do think today we're at a point where it looks like we're going towards a less global and more polar world. And it might not even just be a bipolar, it could be a few groups. And this has profound effects on Israel and specifically the tech community. So just to give an example, I'd call it the secret that a lot of folks, predominantly in the US, but also in other Western countries, don't want to talk about, is the fact that their big money allocators today are basically trying to pull out as aggressively as possible of China.
Right.
And these folks were putting money into China like there's no tomorrow, only 3-4 years ago. And now they're pulling out, and it's not got to do with prices. It's not got to do with technology, because believe me, some of the tech there and some of the prices there they can get in, they'd want to double down. But they need to now invest elsewhere for political reasons. Mm-hmm. And that means you have a shift in capital. You have a shift in capital from other perspectives as well. If you ask VCs here who have Russian investors, only sort of a year or two ago, they were scratching their heads trying to figure out how do they deal with this. Suddenly startups, regardless of valuation, don't want to take their capital. Suddenly they have issues because they can't call capital either. So the color of capital, where you deploy, geographically, politically, is becoming an issue. There are founders, and this is on the extreme end, but they're right to do so, that want to diligent their VCs. Not they're diligent their VCs on whether they help them or not. They want to know where the money's coming from. They say, wait, I'm going to wake up in the morning, dedicate the next 10, 20 years of my life to building something. I want to know, who am I going to be making very wealthy? I want it to be somebody who hopefully has similar values to me. And even if it's not similar values to me, hopefully somebody doesn't have opposing values to me.
Right.
So there are startups out there who say, you know what? I want this capital rather than that capital.
Right,
because,
right. I don't
because
want to
I'm
take
working
the
for you.
Communist Party, and I don't want to take this and that, and because then they'll try to control you.
So we're seeing capital shift. We're seeing, and that's going to have profound implications. And we're also seeing technology matter more, dependent on where it was developed, where the IP sits. I'll give an example: AI, chips, machine learning, cybersecurity. We're just at the beginning, but if you are a company that takes capital, we did actually an analysis on this, and for Israel, so we'll take Israel as an example. If startups in Israel, once they take capital from a US-based investor, the chances of a Chinese investor or entity either investing in them or acquiring them drops by 80%. And by the way, the other way around is even more extreme. An Israeli startup that takes capital from a Chinese investor, the chances of an American entity acquiring or investing in the company drops by 85%. Regardless of the technology, regardless of how good they are, etc. Doing business across these two worlds is becoming more difficult. By the way, I think also Nature just published this on cooperation in scientific papers is decreasing dramatically between different groups of countries, etc. So this has profound implications. It also presents opportunities. Once upon a time, if there was an amazing, I'll take China, but it could be others. If there was an amazing Chinese company leading the world in a specific technology, you'd say, I can't develop this because they're going to end up dominating. And what we're seeing today is people dominate in specific geographies. And you're seeing that not just between China and the US, you're seeing that elsewhere. You're seeing that in VCs as well.
Is this a problem? I'll tell you, I see a parallel like America culturally, people became politically polarized. So it's like, these are left-wing media, this is right-wing media, this is this and that and that. And it's kind of like things became politicized brands, right? Whatever, like, you know, that it's become, this is how my worldview or my values, this and that. Therefore, I associate this private brand with me in a sense. Like, and I think it's polarized and divided the country even just from private consumption. So I'm seeing it there too.
So
right?
I think you're making a slightly different point. I think most or nearly everybody would agree that the way the US and other countries as well are becoming more polar. By the way, Israel to an extent is moving a little bit like that. We're nowhere near as bad, and hopefully we're going to now see a movement back together post the war. We can talk about that. But the point I was making is more global rather than within countries. So within the US, you could call it Democrat, Republican, but global, and people having to develop technologies in different places where there's advantages and disadvantages in that happening.
Do you think Israel is positioned that it can do technologies? One startup here can serve, let's say, the Western, and another startup literally next door can serve the Eastern. Do you think we have that, or do you think we're kind of stuck with the West?
Well, first of all, I don't know if stuck with the West is that bad. I definitely think...
I didn't say it was bad. I meant it limiting in opportunities.
I think there's two underlying factors there. The first is, can you do that? 100%. The building behind us outside the window over there, you've got in there basically Alibaba and Facebook.
Right.
You're not going to get a more extreme example of that. And you have a variety of these literally within a mile radius of us. Israel is nevertheless, to the second point, much more US leaning than China from a tech perspective. And you just see this with the numbers of dollars coming into Israel, the number of exits, and that's for a whole variety of reasons.
That's with our culture,
Listen
free
to your
markets
accent.
and transparency of we're not stealing IP and things like that. Kind of helps.
Yeah, but look where people go to university, and look where it's the ease of doing business, and they speak in English. And I mean, listen to your accent, listen to mine. I mean, you're going to have
mine's more charming.
Definitely.
I'll let the viewers decide.
Yeah, so these things will happen.
Let's talk about technology, and I'm seeing big differences happening between the East and the West. It's exactly kind of this is fusion technology, right? So nuclear fusion, I think, is the future of energy, in my opinion. Waste is nothing. A whole lifetime, as of now, of energy that I will consume if it was nuclear, the disposable is smaller than a can of Coke.
Yep.
Just be able to like how little now. And obviously, if nuclear 4.0 is much safer. You know, France is well known for having over 70% of their energy fueled by nuclear, and I think China is building nuclear capabilities all the time. Do you think we're going to see more nuclear technology here in Israel, at least from the energy perspective?
Yeah, so let's differentiate for a moment just between the nuclear, which is what I think China and France and a few other countries, including the US now, are sort of ramping up, and fusion, which obviously nuclear fusion makes sense, but that's typically talking about sort of fusion technology when people say that.
Okay.
So nuclear, when you read and hear somebody's building a nuclear energy plant, usually means an explosion. And as a result of the explosion, you're releasing energy, and that is a proven concept. People have had nuclear power plants for many, many years. The big pullback of nuclear was as a result of both in Japan and Russia these plants getting sort of hit either by a wave or by sort of misconduction, etc. And the spillover of the nuclear waste is terrible and takes literally hundreds of years to deal with, and it is a huge sort of hassle. And what we're seeing today is countries revisit that and say, you know what, we understand there's a risk, but we nevertheless want to still try and develop nuclear energy because it's efficient, because it's
the rewards
green,
are
because
huge.
Potentially very big.
And Israel doesn't take I was researching just how much space, land, for how much energy. And I was comparing that to solar.
Yeah.
And we have sun here. It's an eyesore. It takes up so much land, obviously, you know, in the cloud. They're cloudy, things like that. And nuclear takes up so much less space, it's so much cheaper, so much more energy efficient, so much more predictable, can work in any kind of weather. So I feel that everyone's just like, this is a no-brainer, right? It doesn't matter where you live. You can live in the Arctic or you can live in the Middle East. Fusion will be just as efficient as opposed to, let's say, solar.
So I could be wrong, but I don't believe that many people are debating between nuclear and solar.
Right.
I think most countries who can afford, meaning there's the wind, there's a variety of to do solar, are doing that anyway. And any energy solution will be a variety of things. And with nuclear, the question is, do you want or not want to have nuclear energy plants? You could take the German approach or the French approach, both sort of right next to each other, totally different on this issue. And the trade-offs are, do you have the scientists, which by the way, you don't really need for solar, but is a huge issue and you need certain expertise. Do you want to take a very long approach because it takes quite a while to build these nuclear plants, etc.? Do you want to have to deal with the biggest issue, by the way, which is the media, the backlash that you'll get when you say you're building nuclear plants? Where are you building this? Near my home? Really? You must be joking. But most scientists are heavily in favor of that. Separate to nuclear, there is fusion energy, which and my friends make fun of me, people make fun of me, I get random people just sending me articles about fusion, which have nothing to do with anything because they know that I was crazy about fusion energy for a while and researching and meeting people, etc. If this is solved, and there's a huge if there, because most of the publications in this space are more PR stunts than actual solving fusion energy. If this is solved, it can change the game across everything else. And that, unlike the fusion, which is pulling things apart and making explosions, is completely different. It's having things stick together.
Yeah.
And by doing that, releasing something which is roughly 10 orders of magnitude bigger than this from an energy perspective. And it's worth saying that 10 orders of magnitude sounds like a lot, because it is, it's 10 times. On the other hand, it's not a million. If it was a million, then you wouldn't have to worry about the finance because it would be so much more efficient. Doesn't matter how, if this costs 1,000 times more to build this plant than this plant, it's still worth it. Because it's only probably 10 times more efficient, maybe a bit more, a bit less, but we're not talking about a million times, you also are going to have to solve, when you solve the physics, you're also going to have to solve the financing for this as well. So I think that's where we are. I'm a bit of a nerd on this topic, but currently I'm probably in touch with, or have spoken in the last 18 months to most of the leading teams in this space. I don't know, I'm not optimistic that we're going to see one succeed in the next 12, 24.
So
30.
you have no investments in fusion?
No, a bunch of people I'm speaking to, it's more out of sort of curiosity. There are a few Israeli teams here. I don't want to say anything negative, but if I had to bet, it wouldn't be one of the Israeli teams at this point in time either.
Got it. What about CRISPR technology? We were talking about that, manipulating DNA.
Yes.
How do you see that from an ethical perspective?
Right. So good question. And I can tell you've researched the topic given the question. So there was I don't know if everyone knows this, but there was a big story in China where somebody actually manipulated babies, and you can research that. It's scary. I think like most tools, you can use it for good or you can use it for bad, and I sound like I'm now out of a TV series. Use this power wisely. I think it could do much more good than bad, just given the type of technology as well. Hopefully it can also solve some of the biggest diseases and challenges that healthcare faces today. I think one of the big challenges that I've come across, and I'm not an expert on this, I've taken a bunch of sort of courses, but one of the biggest challenges that we have there is actually capital for labs, for types of tests, etc. If you think about computing, what happened with computing is that the cost of a line of code, if you call it, or the cost per compute came down so much over the last 10, 15, 20 years that every idiot with an idea can build things, try it out really quickly. So you have tons of innovation off the back of that. You want to build a website? 20 years ago, you'd have to hire somebody that only a few people sort of can do, etc. Now, go to Wix, go to a bunch of websites. Within 10 minutes, you've got your website up and running. You want a server? You can spin up AWS. Like, it's the computing world has really helped innovation. That's also helped sort of healthcare a bit. But what would, I think, help something like CRISPR a lot are areas for scientists or potential innovators, founders, to test ideas really quickly. And there's a variety of projects that are trying to start this. But I think once we see a base where the cost of an innovator comes down a lot, we'll start seeing really rapid sort of solutions.
The cost of innovator comes down a lot. I mean, government's been doing this for a while, where they've been even like mixing DNA of humans and pigs, and these mutants have been existing in labs for decades. This isn't anything new per se. Obviously, the technology has dramatically developed. Are there companies in Israel working on this?
Yes, there is a lot of companies also in Israel working on this. I think
it's in Rehovot largely.
There's also in Rehovot. There's some in Jerusalem as well, which is nice because some in Jerusalem it's not usually at the front of innovation in certain areas. But yeah, there was also sporadic. But yeah, also in Rehovot, I visited a few of them. I'd say it's a little bit different than just the mixing DNA, which we did, and there's a big sort of there's the genome projects that are being released, and that helps. What I think would help here, have you come across AlphaFold?
No.
So AlphaFold, I would encourage everybody to look up. It's not specifically in the CRISPR space, but what they showed, and I don't want to say solved, but they pretty much took a problem that was really, really difficult and just reduced the barriers to entry from like this to this. And that is the team at DeepMind showing how you can predict the way a protein will fold. And that is really important for trying to develop certain types of medicine or etc. And usually you would need loads of engineers or researchers or scientists to try and do that. They came up using AI with a way to predict this pretty, like I would say very accurately, but pretty much across the entire spectrum of proteins. And then they released it, open source. So everybody now can try and use it, tweak it, etc., and come up with new innovations. And if you take, for example, which I like to do, Nature magazine or Science magazine, you'll see now every week a new paper, on average 1 or 2 throughout the magazine, that is being published by scientists using an AlphaFold approach or taking their open source. So what they've really done is they've said, look, this is the barrier for innovation and protein folding. We're going to do a ton of work, not to solve a specific medical challenge, but to lower the barriers for innovation, release this, and now you can literally see people popping up, writing papers, doing things that would have taken them 10, 15 years, but they're doing it very rapidly and quickly. So I think types of technology like CRISPR, fusion would be a bit different, but like that, sometimes need the hero to come and just make this all possible.
It reminds me a little bit of breaking the 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
You just take like one person, and then suddenly it's that's not technology related; it's more psychology. But I think it's
I would say it would be releasing certain shoes that make it something that everybody can now sort of break the 4-minute mile.
I think there was a Robin Williams movie on that, Flubber, right?
Flubber. Shoes that make yes. So
I think I was like Flubber. 6 when that came out. I don't know why.
So we need Flubber. We need Flubber.
There you go. We need Flubber. So you have a book coming out, right? So why are you writing a book?
So I wrote.
So just the headache just doesn't seem worth it.
I was part of Kaufman Fellows and then part of HBS. Both of them I did over the last 2 years. They asked to take time off a project to do a project that you've always wanted to do, and that's what I did. I've always wanted to write a book.
Why did you always want to write a book?
I just did. I like the topic. I keep seeing it creep up into my work and into my day-to-day life, and I wanted to sort of explore it and write about it.
Do you consider yourself a writer in general?
No, I'm not very good at writing, I don't think.
So why not do like a video series or something else, or a lecture?
No, I like reading books. I read
like
a lot
reading,
of.
but
I
like
like
writing.
reading books. So actually, the hardest part for me wasn't coming up with the ideas and researching and interviewing people. The hardest part was writing it in a way that I'm happy with people to read it. And
Oh, good
I
luck.
find
You'll
it-
never be happy enough, right? It's not the.
I want to feel like it's a good product and people that read it will enjoy it.
That's nice. So what are you writing about?
So I'm writing about a concept called local maximum. The concept in a nutshell, imagine you're a paratrooper, and this is the way I explain it at the beginning of the book. Imagine you're a paratrooper in the desert, and your goal is to get to the highest mountain, the highest point in the Negev desert, the Sahara desert, doesn't matter which. And I drop you off and I say, okay, you got, I don't know, a day, go. How'd you go about this? You're probably looking around, left, right, etc. You see a tall mountain, you start walking up. You get to the top of the mountain, you see, oh, you know, there's actually a higher one maybe over there. You walk the whole way down, you've got to go across, and then you've got to go up. At some point, you might see even a higher one, but you're not sure, is it worth going the whole way down to go up somewhere which is just a little bit higher, etc. The idea of a local maximum is being stuck somewhere where you're at a maximum, you're at the top of a mountain. The only way you can move is down. You can't go up from this point, but it's not the global maximum, it's not the highest point in the field, it's a local one. Startups have this when they maybe are the best or they're in a specific product, feature, wherever they are, but they're really at a maximum or they're coming towards a maximum, but it's really local, it's not a big company. People have this in their career. They've done something, they've progressed, etc. And the problem that they're at is they can see that they're basically doing really well, but the only way they can move forward is by taking a drastic step down or moving somewhere completely different so that they can get towards hopefully a global or higher local maximum. And this idea of trying to avoid local maximums, or what computer scientists would call local minima, is something that in recent years, call it the last decade, computer scientists have invested billions in it, because it's probably one of the biggest challenges for anybody, any computer scientist today. Amazon, Google, Facebook, you name it, one of their biggest challenges is avoiding local maximums with their software. So they have developed techniques to try and help their computers avoid local maximums. And what the book is about is nothing, you don't have to be a computer scientist, there's no code in there, etc. But it's taking techniques from the computer world and showing individuals, companies, movements, NGOs, how they could potentially apply these to their work to get to higher ground.
Do you have a working title?
The current title is How to Move Up When the Only Way is Down.
Okay, got it. I like it. It's good. I hope it wasn't going to be.
I was hoping you were going to say that, but like
I was trying to be critical, and I failed. I was hoping you wanted to say is like I had the word local maximum in it.
Yeah. The subtitle needs something like local maximum in there.
It's long, but it's good. It's very well done. Awesome. What are you going to do with the book once you join? Is it to sell? Is it to give away? Are you going to leverage it for business?
I don't know. As I said, for me, it's been like more of a passion project and part of sort of actually HBS and Kaufman have both been really helpful with.
You have a lot of free time on your hand, man.
I've written it. I wrote it. It's getting feedback. The nice thing
it's
is
probably fast to write when you just know it and you're passionate about it and you feel like there is enough information on it. Do you ever worry that what you're going to write about may, let's say, because it's a book, it's like partly outdated in the future? Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, you're writing about it now, it's done. Okay, by the time the book's done, it won't come out for another 6 months. By the time it's out and you're marketing it and selling it, like in a year from now, it's like, it's time for version 2.0. And like, you know what I mean? Like in a sense, since it's technology related, it moves so fast. This is like one of my reasons why I think universe is a waste of time and makes it stupid. But even if you just do the fact that whatever you're learning, if you go into the real world, like that textbook is so outdated, isn't even used.
So I am actually, I definitely have a number of concerns. That is not one of them.
What are your
just to give an example, you mentioned university. So what do you think should be studied?
I don't think universities are relevant.
What do you think people should study?
I think math, languages, things
Okay.
like that, travel, geography,
Okay, if you had to teach people something, what would you teach them?
reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Okay.
And I am actually public speaking.
So that's great.
How to
Let's
be-
take that. Let's take that as an example.
How to
Reading, writing.
being embarrassed in public. I think it's
Amazing.
a massive skill.
Amazing.
Sales,
Let's take these examples.
media. I think that's far more important than.
Great. So you've said reading, writing, media, public speaking. you've basically said, I'm going to teach them skills rather than per se facts or specific knowledge.
Right.
I want to give people skills so that they can go and do whatever they want with it. What I think I'm hopefully trying to do, or I hope it will be achieved in the book, is teaching people a skill, how to view local maximums, how to notice them in advance, how to make decisions in a way to avoid them, rather than teaching them something that is knowledge per se and will potentially go out of date.
Got it. Okay. Cool. I like that. So it's kind of you're teaching them how to think. I remember when I was studying. I like history personally. I love history. Growing up, history was just another topic I had to pass, and it was memorizing dates and this and that, and there wasn't that underlining theme of understanding history through the lens of technology, of culture, of geography, of war. Once you get into that, it's far more interesting, and then history makes a lot more sense, Knowing just random dates and random names actually doesn't add any context to anything. It's more kind of what's going on, what's actually happening in the world, not necessarily flash in the pan events, so to speak. I don't know. I think we could have a lot of room for improvement, maybe on education.
By the way, in religious schools, they're coming to a similar conclusion, which is when they want to teach people Talmud, more and more schools are trying to make people A, like it, but B, be able to pick up a Daf Gemara and learn it themselves than necessarily just memorize off by heart. Because you can just see, if you're able to do that by yourself as a skill, you'll do the rest by yourself.
Is that how people define a rabbi? Is that if they don't know the answer, they know how to find the answer?
Yeah, so much
Which
more
is
important.
just in general, that's kind of self-learning.
Yeah.
How do you think self-learning has changed recently? I feel like there's a lot of people that I'll tell you what I'm asking. I see a lot of people they claim they want to self-learn, but they don't, right? Everyone thinks they're a self-learner. It's true. But what they'll do is let's say they'll ask their friend or their WhatsApp groups, or they'll all listen to the same podcast, and there's no independent thinking. How can we bring more probably independent thinking into those that, let's say, they like to learn and be informed?
Okay, so I think independent thinking might be a little bit different to just people learning things by themselves. I like learning things by themselves. I might be one of the many people who just say that. So that's probably in that bucket.
A lot of people say that, but few of them do that. I'm not saying.
No,
obviously, you do. You're writing a book.
Everybody learns by themselves. I mean, how did you learn how to speak?
Right, but pursuing it.
Okay, even so, I think people learn to a certain extent. I think the way people are learning is changing. We're, by the way, seeing a lot of education startups trying to sort of help shape people. People will learn now off Instagram or off YouTube clips.
Right.
Never mind even just the Courseiras of this world. So that is changing. I think the independent thinking sometimes is more about the environment and your feedback loop. So I'll just give one example. I remember when I came across Israeli entrepreneurs who said to me, I'm a second-time founder. I said to them, but your first startup failed completely and you barely did anything. Yeah, but we're second-time founders. We should be raising more money at a higher valuation now. And it was an amazing learning experience for me, because I came from the UK, where in the UK, if you had a startup that failed within a year, you're probably likely to try and get that off your CV somehow.
Right.
Volunteer, smudge it, move it in a bit of a different way. And so I think whether you are a purely independent thinker or you learn things by yourselves, if you're in an environment that accepts failure, independent thinking, doing things your own way, you're far more likely to do it. And if you're in a place which is going to sort of scrutinize you for those failures, then it will be harder.
The Jewish response isn't the fact that it was but you failed, is you only failed once? That's come back to when you failed 3 times and you're 4th time finder. So this brings our conversation to a close. I just want to say thank you so much for having us. And for those following, you can check down in the description how to follow Judah and Hetz Ventures, and also, of course, Israel Tech. Make sure to give us hit subscribe if you haven't. Judah, any final words to people to stay up to date other than the socials, which we'll link, with you and Hetz and what you're up to?
I mean, we're always happy to welcome people here. We love crazy ideas. We do.
What's better, crazy ideas or crazy people?
ideas.
Okay. you had to think about it.
I'd prefer a really great gut person with a crazy idea than a really crazy eye person with a bit of a boring idea.
Okay.
But yes, but it's been wonderful having you here, and it's really been a fun conversation. So thank you very much.
Thanks for being on Israel Tech.
Thank you.